Chapter 5 of The Wheel of Fortune by a Self-Made Man. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 5, in which the enemy is routed. At 9 o'clock, Mary announced that the water in the wash boiler she had put on the big stove had reached the boiling point. There were no signs as yet of the enemy. Bert had posted himself at the washroom window to await their coming, after he had personally inspected every door in the lower part of the house and found they were securely fastened by lock and bolt. About this time the moon rose above the trees, flooding the building and its approaches with a bright light, much to the brave boy's satisfaction. It was impossible now for the thieves to reach their base of operations without being discovered by the watchful eyes on the alert for their coming. Helen Potts insisted on remaining with Bert in the washroom, where he stood on guard. "Jonas ought to be home by this time," she said, "but I'm afraid that he will take advantage of Papa's absence to remain out as late as he dares. He has learned to play a game which he calls pool, and every chance he gets he goes over to the Essex house to indulge his taste for it. I don't approve of it at all, neither does Papa, but my brother will have his own way when he can." The words were hardly out of her mouth before Bert made out 3 shadows approaching the house by way of the apple orchard, which joined the truck patch immediately in the rear of the washroom. "They're coming," said the boy in a low tone. "Are you sure, Bert?" asked Helen nervously. "Yes. 3 men are slinking through the apple orchard as though they didn't want to attract attention to themselves. Is the light out in the kitchen?" "Yes, Bert." "Then tell Mary the cook to fetch a pail full of boiling water and dipper. It won't be many seconds before they are right under this window, if they haven't changed their plan of operations." The 3 men crossed the truck patch and vaulted the fence into the yard. They were close enough now for Bert to recognize their features distinctly in the bright moonlight. Rake and Harrow looked the cold-blooded and determined rascals they were, but Ed Hawley, who in physique had the advantage of his companions, acted like a man not thoroughly satisfied with the adventure in which he was engaged. The other 2 kept close to him, however, and spurred him on. After surveying the rear of the house carefully, the trio appeared to be confident that they had a clear field before them. "Don't seem to be anyone stirring," Bert heard Harrow remark. "Visitors ain't expected at this hour of the night," chuckled Rake, giving Hawley a nudge. "Then the sooner we get it over and done with, the better it will suit me," said Bert's father impatiently. "That's the way to talk," answered Rake approvingly. "We'll get you educated up to this sort of thing by and by. You want to learn to go the whole hog when you start out, and have done with such shilly-shallying as you've been doing tonight," spoke up Harrow. "You won't make any mistake about following what Harrow says. He knows the ropes. Now, you watch me pry open that window. See how quick and neat I'll do it." The window in question was one behind which Bert stood on guard, dipper in hand, ready to discharge a pint of scalding water into the face of the confident Mr. Rake as soon as he accomplished his first move in the game. Rake had evidently had lessons from an expert, for he used his jimmy with professional accuracy and dispatch. With such a tool in practiced hands, the washroom window as an obstacle to progress became a mere fiction and a sham. The rascal opened it in what he was pleased to call 3 shakes of a dead lamb's tail. Then he looked into the washroom. A moment later he wished he had not. Bert swung the dipper, and its boiling contents splashed full on the ruffian's face. He gave a fearful yell of agonizing pain and tumbled backward onto the ground. The effect on his 2 companions was most startling. They were fairly paralyzed by this unexpected denouement, and Bert had time to replenish his dipper before either of them made a move. The boy flung the second dose of scalding water at Harrow, burning his face and hands severely, and this broke the spell. Ed Hawley seemed to realize that the game was up, and that flight was the best thing he could resort to at that instant. Haunted by a vision of the county jail, he did not stand on the order of his going, but started for the nearest fence with all the agility he was capable of, and Harrow, howling and swearing like mad, followed in his steps, leaving his associate, Rake, squirming on the ground and tearing up the earth with his fingernails in the torture of the moment. The water had knocked him out as probably nothing else would have done, except a bullet from the revolver Bert had near at hand, and which he had resolved to avail himself of only as a last resort. Finding that 2/3 of the enemy had fled, leaving the other third wounded on the field of battle, Bert, now master of the situation, determined to take that third prisoner. So, calling Mary the cook and a piece of stout clothesline to his aid, he issued forth from the kitchen door and seized upon Rake. The rascal was in no condition to make any resistance worth mentioning to the combined strength of the stalwart boy and the muscular servant. He was overpowered, secured, and removed to the kitchen to await the return of Lawyer Potts. The cook, taking pity on his sufferings, applied certain homemade remedies to the burns, which had a soothing effect and eased the pain. In proportion as his hurt subsided, his impudence returned. "So it's you, Bert Hawley, who took the wind out of our sails, eh?" he flashed angrily, as he looked the athletic lad scornfully over from head to foot. "Well, I shan't forget it. You'll find I've got a long memory. If you have me sent to the lock-up, the whole county shall know that your drunken father is just as guilty as I am. Do you understand? I've nothing to do with what happens to you. Lawyer Potts will pass upon your case. I simply did my duty in defending this house from the 3 men who are trying to make a forcible entry to the purpose of robbing the premises." "Yeah, you may send me behind the bars, you sanctimonious little monkey, but the time is bound to come when you'll have cause to wish you hadn't butted into what did not concern you." With these words Rake relapsed into a sulky silence, but he never removed his little ferret-like eyes from Bert as long as the lad remained within reach of his gaze. It was 10:30 when Jonas's bungling efforts to use his night latchkey on the front door attracted the attention of his sister, and she let him in. He proved to be a couple of sheets to the wind, as sailors say, which means that he was partially intoxicated. A nice state for a boy of his family connections to be found in, and Helen was thoroughly disgusted with him, and made no bones about telling him so. "Wait till father hears about it, you'll catch it." And she turned her back full upon him, too indignant to have any further converse with him. "Who are you entertaining in the parlor so late as this?" he asked with a half-tipsy curiosity. "Introduce me to your friend. Glad to know any friend of Sister Helen's." He pushed her rudely aside and craned his neck around the door until he made out Bert Hawkins. Then his face grew black, and he sneered. "So that's your friend, is it? I don't want to know him. Common pauper. Father's lazy drunkard. Mother's—" Helen clapped her hand over his mouth and pushed him up the hall. "I'll tell father how you are behaving," she cried, tears of mortification and resentment overflowing her eyes. "Tell him, Tattle-tongue," snorted Jonas as he began to stagger upstairs to bed. "I'm a gentleman. Don't associate with beggars, not on your life." He escaped just in time. In the course of 5 minutes, his father and mother arrived home. Of course, Lawyer Potts was astonished to learn what had taken place that evening. He warmly thanked Bert, and complimented him upon the stratagem by which he had brought confusion into the ranks of the would-be robbers. "What I once held against your father is past and gone," he said with some feeling. "I should be glad to do him a favor today in recognition of the debt of grateful appreciation I owe his son." The lawyer would not hear of Bert leaving his home that night. "You must pass your last night in Jayville, under my roof," he added when the boy explained to him his future movements as far as he could outline them. "I will give you a letter to a personal friend in Baltimore requesting him to do whatever he can to advance your prospects." "Thank you, sir. And you will write to me sometimes, won't you, Bert?" said Helen as she bade him good night. "I shall be anxious to know how you are getting on." Next morning, as he was about to start for Rye Junction, she repeated the request with an even greater earnestness, and Bert, delighted that she should show such an interest in him, readily promised to write her when he had anything worth telling. End of chapter 5.